Aren't you concerned for your safety?
Okay, let's take that one first.
Okay. Well, okay.
Well, during the 10 years investigating what happened to me in Project Pegasus, I was definitely concerned about my safety. In fact, in the summer of 2003, during my first fact-finding trip to New Mexico, a set of meetings were facilitated with different people. One of them was Governor Richardson. Another was Jack Pruitt, who had been one of the team leaders on Project Pegasus. A third individual I met with in the parking lot of, this was in June of 2003, of the Wolf Creek Pass Ski Lodge, which obviously was not being frequented because it was the middle of the summer and nobody was skiing. And during that meeting, I was essentially told by a representative of the Executive Office of the President, this would be George W. Bush's administration, the following. I was basically told that my memories of having been involved in Project Pegasus were valid, that the project involved black technologies that represented sensitive national security secrets, that I was admonished or being advised to cease and desist from investigating my experiences, talking about them, or writing about them, and that if I didn't do that, they couldn't, quote-unquote, guarantee my survival. So by that point into my investigation, I was literally being instructed by the executive branch to terminate my investigation. And I decided not to, primarily because I concluded that we really can't implement our destinies as individuals if we hold on to our fear of death. Achieving great purposes requires basically some form of fearlessness in the sense that you have to let go of worrying about the consequences of what you're doing. And so I resolved then to basically patronize them and tell them, sure, I'll shut up. But then I quietly continued my investigation. It's now gone on for an additional 6 years, during which I've recovered a lot more data. So, yes, I was actively concerned during my investigation that I might be assassinated as a result of investigating what happened to me and then later publishing this expose that goes into one of the more sensitive areas of national security activities, even implicating the U.S. presidency. Regarding your point about my dad, I think it might be helpful to go back and consider who he was. He had been a combat medic during World War II and had seen many children who had been killed in war. He had worked on the Ramjet engine in the B-70 strategic bomber immediately after the July 1952 overflight of our nation's capital by, 9 dish-shaped craft clocked at 7,000 miles per hour by Langley Air Force Base. So he was profoundly involved in classified aerospace projects that were being launched to protect the people of our planet from any potential threat that the extraterrestrials posed. So he had that degree of concern and involvement in protecting life on Earth, human life. I think it's clear also that he didn't volunteer me into the project. I was. In fact, what happened was he was contacted at work by the U.S. Army and informed that I would be in the project. And that's actually one of the mysteries that I haven't been able to resolve in my investigation. In the final analysis, it remains a mystery as to why I was selected. We know that Admiral Rickover had launched a project called Project Talent in 1959 to identify young Americans who possessed either extraordinary intelligence, psychic ability, or leadership potential, and to cultivate their human abilities in these types of programs, even expose them to defense projects so they could later contribute to them after getting more education. So I think it's safer to identify the fact that I was more identified by Project Talent as somebody the government wanted to work with than I was volunteered into a classified defense project by my dad. It's also clear that at a certain stage, around 1967-68, when I was brought into the project, the U.S. government was already in possession of information about me pertaining to my Mars research. And that is to say, I had already been identified as a person of interest, as somebody who, like Richard Hogan and Mike Barra and all the great pioneers of Mars anomaly research that George has had on the show, that I, too, would play a part in contributing to that literature. So I think it's a very complicated profile. In fact, my father was approached. He didn't just say, well, let's use my son in this just because he was one of the project engineers. And then regarding the environmental issue that you raised, this actually came up in a seminar that I took part in imagine Al Gore is studying with Roger Revelle about global warming at Harvard as an undergraduate at this time. I'm a child participant in Project Pegasus, and we're having a similar discussion. I remember saying during a seminar, well, if we use teleportation, we'll remove from the atmosphere all of those pollutants and particulates that are currently being put into the world's atmosphere by planes, trains, and automobiles. So the environmental significance of teleportation is that it'll allow us to obviate most of the pollution that is currently being contributed to the global atmosphere from transportation. And that's a significant component of the global warming equation. And so,
Andy, why did they call the project Pegasus?
Well, when we were told what the project descriptor was, the project title, and it was explained how classified defense projects are given one name or the other, Project Manhattan, Project Zero, and so forth, Project Montauk. We were told that sometimes the naming was arbitrary, as in the case of Project Manhattan. In the case of Project Pegasus, we were told that the reason that Pegasus was selected is because the technologies would take us over the rainbow, that in the same way that Pegasus in Greek mythology, flew to the summit of Mount Olympus, these technologies would take us into non-ordinary experience, some of which would seem almost magical or fantastic in its reach. And in fact, that is what happened. There were times when I was on Project Pegasus involved in these different forms of quantum access where I literally felt a zeal about what we were doing. I felt like a yo-yo on the end of a string. I had this deep sense of profound enjoyment and excitement about the fact that I was literally on the cutting edge of human experience. Other times, we were experiencing things that were quite terrifying. But I believe that they called the Project Pegasus because a part of our experience on the project would be accessing non-ordinary realities that would be as magical as Pegasus flying to the summit of Mount Olympus.
Fascinating. Andy, give out your website, would you please?
Right. My Mars writings, and I'm really trying to create an international movement of research associates who will, as I have done in my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, show through works of natural history, through photo analysis and text, that Mars is an inhabited planet, and therefore we need to protect it from human beings from Earth. That work is currently up on the Internet. It's an evolving website at projectmars.net. And my cause to try to have the U.S. government declassify teleportation so that we can use it to advantage human beings around our planet is at a site that's just under development right now called projectpegasus.net.
And we will make sure we link all of those for you, Andy. We'll be back in a moment with Craig Hewlett on Coast to Coast AM.